Welcome to this episode of Unraveling Adoption, an intentional space to delve into adoption's complexities together. I'm Beth Syverson. I'm an adoptive mom of a talented 19-year-old son, Joe, who is trying to find his path. I'm walking beside him while working on my own personal growth and healing. We are committed to helping anyone touched by adoption, and we want to help the general public understand adoption's complexities better too. Today's guest is Katie Wynen, a transracial, international, Colombian adoptee with a master's degree in social work. Katie has worked with members of the adoption triad since 2006. She studied under Dr. Joyce McGuire Pavo in Boston before moving to Oakland and joining the staff of PACT, an adoption alliance, in 2012. At PACT, Katie works in adoption placement, leads the adult adoptee support groups, and provides adoption education nationwide. Katie is an Angels in Adoption 2019 recipient from the Congressional Coalition on Adoption Institute. She is a huge advocate for adoptees, particularly ones who are people of color and LGBTQ+. So it's great having you here on Unraveling Adoption, Katie. Looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. First, why don't you just share your adoption story briefly so we know where you're coming from?
Sure. I was born in Bogota, Colombia in September of 1982. And my mother and father, who are both cis-het white Episcopalian parents, adopted me from my orphanage. They had adopted my brother in 1976. We are not biologically related. And then they came back in 1982 and adopted me. I was raised in Bergen County, New Jersey for about the first 3 years of my life, and then down in South Florida on the East Coast, basically for the rest of my life with my mom, my dad, and my brother.
Okay. And your family's all white. Were you also in white communities?
Yes and no. I used to think I was in all white communities, and then I started to meet adoptees who were in all white communities.
Really all white. Okay.
Really all white. Like they were the only. South Florida was actually like my public school was pretty diverse.
Okay.
So I wasn't totally the only, but yes, I had white parents, white extended family, predominantly white institutions for education, but also the diversity of South Florida.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure your parents were lovely people and we're not throwing shade at anyone, but no. I think in the 80s, maybe parents didn't have as much education around transracial issues.
Correct.
And if they would do it today, maybe they would have had different education going into it, different resources to manage it better.
Yes, absolutely.
I know I adopted my son in 2004 and I did not do a good job. He's Asian and I'm white. So I didn't do a good job, but I think that hopefully things like this podcast and your organization and there's so much out there, resources now online on all these Zoom meetings. And so hopefully that transracial parents today have many more opportunities to learn and grow and figure this stuff out. Because I bet it was hard growing up as a Colombian person in a white family.
Yes, absolutely. I think when I was younger, I didn't know any better, right? Like that's my mom and dad, that's my family. Don't question me. That's my real parents. That's my real brother. And then as I got older and could think for myself and was away from the home where I was not always surrounded by my white parents and the world saw me as who's this brown woman out in the world on her own? It just definitely made me reflect back and look back at like, oh, wow, this is where my parents missed the mark. This is where the adoption agencies missed the mark. I have much more awareness. Okay. And that's what I see with other adoptees that I connect with is in the moment as kids, we're like, this is the greatest thing ever. And then when we become adults, because we all do, we become more aware and we have more agency to look, to ask, to challenge, to question. Yeah.
So what are some examples of things that looking back, you're like, oof, that was not good. That hurt.
My parents used to say, so I grew up in Boca Raton, Florida, which is an hour north of Miami. And my dad used to say, oh, no, we don't go to Miami because we don't speak the language. The predominant language of Miami is Spanish, the language of my birth culture, my birth people, my birth country. So hearing my parents say, oh, we don't go there, we don't speak the language, then just falls on me like, but that's everybody I look like. That's the language my birth parents speak. That's the language I would have spoken. They didn't put me in Spanish immersion language. My father is from the Netherlands and speaks fluent Dutch. They didn't teach me that either, which I would have appreciated because it would have made it easier to pick up Spanish.
Yeah, they're both Romance languages, right? So a lot of crossover.
A lot of crossover. Yeah. So it was comments like that. I look back and my closest friends that I grew up with were all kids of color, not adopted, but kids of color.
Okay. So you're drawn to
because
them.
I was like, drawn to that. And my brother too. His best friend was the Indian family across the street, not adopted at all.
Okay.
And Amrish was his best friend. And my best friends were David, Amanda, and Amy, all kids of color, not adopted either.
Oh.
But my brother, like now that I look back, I'm like, oh, my brother and I were looking for that because we were surrounded by whiteness.
And it sounds like nobody told you can't be friends with them. So that's good.
Oh yeah, totally. I think I hate to use the word lucky in adoption, but that's where I was lucky.
Oh,
like I have friends that grew up on a farm in Minnesota in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
And I used to complain about where I grew up, but I can now look back and say, oof, no, actually I was pretty lucky.
Yeah.
Yes, you look at my dance picture and there's only 3 brown legs. All the other legs are white. Mm-hmm. But then if you look at my elementary and middle school, when I was in public school, I'm one of tons of kids of color.
Okay.
It was high school when I switched to a private, predominantly white high school that it also landed on me because high school is like identity search time too.
Yeah.
So then it also kind of landed of like, oh, wow, I'm one of the only on this campus. Yeah.
Oh,
great education.
Okay.
But
yeah.
yeah.
It's such an important thing that, especially if parents really prize education, it might steer you toward a school like that, which is, there's nothing wrong with that really. But the other piece is so critical too. Like, is there a good school that is more diverse? I don't know.
Yeah, that's the dream.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And did you grow up wanting to be a social worker in adoption land? Is this your only career path that you've had? How did your career trajectory go?
Yeah, yes and no. I always talked about adoption growing up. My brother never did, but I talked about it all the time. I mean, it was obvious because we didn't look like our parents, but I wanted to be a teacher. My parents said I would need to be a lawyer or a teacher because I like to perform. So I need an audience. Okay. I am a dancer.
Yeah.
So yes, I am a performer. So I graduated college and I went and taught at a boarding school for 4 years. I was an English major and I said, okay, I'm going to be a teacher. And the boarding school I was in Connecticut, and pretty much like 90% of the kids of color on campus had been adopted by white parents.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So that was my first intro. Obviously, I have been adopted for almost 41 years. I'll be 41 next month. So it's my personal experience for 41 years and my professional experience for 17. So it was working with these youth and their families. I was the only faculty member who was adopted. For a few years, I was the only faculty member of color on campus. Oof. So the kids kind of, like I did when I was growing up, the kids flocked to me.
Yeah.
Right. Because they were like, you look like us. Oh, and you're adopted?
Oh, ding, ding, ding.
We did these intense family weekends, and one of them was focused entirely on adoption. Oh. And that's when I really got into it and was like, oh, I can do this work because I've lived this experience and I'm connecting with these kids. And then I said to my coworker one day, I said, how can I do this for kind of the rest of my life, or like as a next step?
Yeah.
And she said, you can become a social worker. Okay. And I said, oh, really? And that's what sent me to my MSW program.
Okay. So you already had a bachelor's in English.
Yes.
And so that flows pretty naturally. I probably didn't have too much trouble getting into a master's program, and a couple of years of that, and very good. And you studied under Dr. Joyce, who's amazing. Yeah. She's like a legend in the space. What was it like working with her?
Oh my gosh, it was amazing. I'll never forget the moment. So I went to Simmons College, now Simmons University, for my MSW in Boston. And I went to my first orientation for our internship program.
Okay.
And the presenter said, in your first year, you don't really get to choose. In your second year, you get more of a choice. And there were like a dozen internships that were the entire year. Some were just September to May.
Okay.
She said, here are a few that go the entire year. And one of them was Center for Family Connections in Cambridge, run by Dr. Joyce McGuire-Pavo. And it's an adoption center. And I was like, that is where I'm going. So I spent my first year of MSW school, I guess, manifesting it, speaking it into existence. I applied. Joyce has a very rigorous interview process to become just an intern. Wow. There was like 20 of us. It was an all-day process. We did genograms, case reviews, individual interviews. I got to be individually interviewed by Joyce. And then when you are accepted, which I was, then you're on her roster from July 1st to June 30th.
Oh, okay.
So I was already graduated with my MSW and I still had about 6 weeks with her program.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And it was incredible. I got to work under her and other clinicians, not all social workers, MFTs, art therapists.
Mm-hmm.
I did support groups for kiddos ages 6 to 9.
Oh, wow.
I worked with kiddos ages 5 to 16.
Wow.
I supervised birth family visits for the Massachusetts Department of Social Services. So it was kind of everything: individual therapy, group therapy, supervising visits, case management review. And then I got to be involved in the intern interview process the next year. Yeah, which was a lot of fun.
Turnabout is fair play. Very good. Well, that sounds like an amazing opportunity. And that is like the dream path right there. It seems like to me.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is amazing. You made that happen. That's great. I'm sure that was really amazing working with her. And I bet you learned a lot. It sounds like you had your fingers in lots of pies and had lots of opportunities. And then did you go straight from there to PACT?
Yes. I said to Joyce, I'm moving to Oakland, California. She was like, no, because she wanted me to stay. And I am pretty sure I would have been able to step into the center and work as a social worker. But my partner and I at the time were moving to Oakland, California.
Okay.
And Joyce said, okay, you have to connect with Beth Hall and PACT and Adoption Alliance. And I said, all right.
Because that's where they are.
That's where they are.
Oh, okay. So you moved there before you even talked to PACT. Okay.
Correct. I had plans to move. I had plans to be out here. My parents were not happy because at the time in 2011, California was struggling, the most expensive state. I had my MSW, but not a full job. It was a situation, but I survived.
You took a dive, right?
Yeah, jumped right in. I met with Beth Hall in the summer of 2011, and she said, I don't have capacity to bring you on, but we have our annual family camp if you're interested. And I said, I can't do it this summer because in 2011, I actually went back to Colombia for the first time with my parents.
Wow.
Yeah. So then I moved to Oakland in 2011, struggled to find a job, got into fitness teaching because of my dance background. And then my partner at the time said, look, you should call that PACT place again and see if there's anything. So I did. And summer of 2012, I said, Beth, I will volunteer. I will do whatever you need. I can come to your family camp this summer. And she said, you know what? We actually have a presenter, like small breakout presenter that had to cancel last minute. Do you feel like you can run some afternoon workshops for parents? And I said, absolutely, because that's what I did at my boarding school. That's what I did with Beth. Yep.
Sure.
So my very first foray into PACT was their camp 2012. And I went in manifesting again and said, Beth is going to see me in action and then want to hire me. And she essentially did. And I've been there ever since.
Wow. Okay. Tell me about this manifesting thing. I want to do more of that.
Right.
Is it seriously just like the secret kind of stuff or?
Yeah, the secret kind of stuff where I went to PACT camp in 2012 and I said, this is what I want to do. This is where I want to be. She's going to see me in action and she's going to want to hire me.
Okay.
So literally like a week or two after camp, she called or emailed and said, can I bring you on as an independent consultant to do basically consultation meetings with families that are looking to adopt?
Okay.
And I said, sure. So I started that maybe September 2012. And then May 2013, our front desk administrator was leaving. And Beth was like, so I have somebody leaving, which means I have the ability to bring you on. So May 2013, right after Mother's Day, actually, I started at PACT, kind of just like Monday through Thursday. And then I don't remember when, but then I went to full time. We were an adoption facilitator at the time. And then we became a full licensed agency in late 2017. And to do that, you need a social worker on staff. So I was like, that's me. My agency director is a licensed marriage and family therapist, but the state of California says an MSW has to be on staff. So that's me. And now I do home studies and adoption placements and education and trainings.
Okay. So let's get into what makes PACT different, because I know kind of where you stand on adoption, and it's sort of strange that you're working for an adoption agency. So help us figure this out.
I will open with what I always say. PACT is the only adoption agency I would work for in this country as an adoptee myself. And the reason I say that is because our focus is supporting prospective adoptive parents of color. So Black, Asian, Latinx, Indigenous, multiracial, either single parent or two parent families. And a lot of people are like, but what if I'm Black and my partner's white? To us, that is still prospective adoptive parents of color. So at least one or both parents within the family is going to share the race of the child.
Okay.
So our focus is also same race placements, right? So we did a placement a month ago and the baby that was born was Black and was just placed with two parents who are also Black.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, having parents that are white, I know what that journey was like. Yeah. Getting to watch this kid go into a family where, oh, you're going to, in quotes, look like your parents, because I know you don't match, but like
not exactly,
your parents know what it means to be Black.
Yeah.
Your parents are connected to Black community. Your parents are connected to Black culture, Black history, right? All of that. So that kid already is going to have a massively different experience than I did.
Yeah. When that kid goes out to dinner with its family, they won't get stares and craning necks going, what's going on there?
Correct.
It'll blend in.
And somebody hopefully will not say, how much did you pay for that kid? Because I know too many transracial or interracial adoptees where somebody will yell that to them because they're like, oh, there's some white parents with some brown kids. So how much did you pay for them?
Oh, yeah. I haven't gotten that. I got, where did you get him? Like, like aisle 3, it's like, it sounds terrible.
It really does. So having that layer already removed in a way for the adoptees that I've facilitated over a dozen placements in the last 10 years that I've been at PACT, and maybe one was transracial. So that's the other thing. When PACT started 30 plus years ago, it definitely was supporting white adoptive parents because our founders are both white adoptive parents to kids of color. Then Beth Hall was like, wait a minute, there's a great disservice to prospective adoptive parents of color. She saw the struggles that her two kids went through being POC and white family. And she said, let me start to recruit adoptive parents of color. Let's kind of try to switch this. So in my 10 years at PACT, we did do one placement to a white family. They were already parenting a Black child. Every other family I've placed with has had at least one or two parents of color who shares the race of the child.
But even that child had a sibling that shared their race. So
correct.
There's that. Okay. Yeah. Well, that sounds really amazing. And do you also, like when a birth parent comes to you, are you the kind of agency that tries to convince them it'll be great if they adopt and it's open adoption and it's fabulous, and kind of to try to nudge them that direction?
Absolutely not. The other important piece I forgot to mention about why I am working at PACT is my placement team. It's really just myself and my coworker, Susan, who is a first parent and an adoptee as well.
Oh, wow.
And I am an adoptee. So the both of us come with lived experience. She knows what it is like to place a child. She knows what it is like to be adopted. I know what it is like to be adopted. And then Beth, who oversees the whole organization, knows what it is like to be an adoptive parent to kids of color. So all triad members are represented, including additional constellation members within our staff. So we are lived experience running this program. And our first step, no matter what, even if there is a baby in somebody's arms because they just gave birth, our first step is family preservation. How can you parent this kid? What can we do to help you? What can we do to make you not do this placement? No, talking with somebody about an adoption placement is the last thing we talk about with them.
So you try other things first.
Correct.
How do people find you? Because they're kind of vultures, those organizations that really try to convince you. How do they find you?
That's where we struggle a little bit. We're a small nonprofit. We're healthy, financially healthy and stable. And because of our stance and our mission and our goal to be as ethical as possible, we don't have a $500,000 Google advertising budget.
Yes.
Correct. Which these other big box agencies have. So we're kind of old school, feet to the ground. Susan went around to hospitals, other agencies, college health centers, even prisons or jails, because they often will incarcerate or arrest pregnant individuals. We just kind of feet on the ground running. Susan is also on the board of All Options, which is a nationwide talk line. We're connected to a couple of abortion providers because we fully believe and support an abortion if accessible and the individual wants it. So if somebody has missed their time frame for an abortion, we're one of, if not the only adoption agency listed for, you couldn't terminate, but here's an agency that will provide you with full options counseling. So somebody will call us and say, I missed my window to terminate. I'd like to look into adoption. Our next question will be, well, what about parenting? What have you looked into? What sort of resources can we give you for parenting? we talk about that. And then if they're like, no, I really don't want to, I've tried it, I really don't. Then we say, okay, if not you, who else in your family? Mm-hmm. What's a kinship placement we can do? Your sibling, your parent, your grandparent. No, I don't have anybody there. Then we say, okay, what about not blood related, but do you have a best friend, who can step up, right? Like somebody in your community.
Yeah.
Community care, essentially. Mm-hmm. And then they say, oh, no, I don't have that either. And then we say, okay, it sounds like adoption might be the path that you have to really consider. Okay. You identify as Black. Here are 6 Black families you can choose from.
Okay.
And then up into the point where they sign that paperwork, we are saying, are you sure you want to do this placement? Yeah. You can still parent your child. We can still connect you with resources. Uh-huh. A lot of our families will meet an expectant or parent because they haven't signed paperwork yet. So they're not a birth parent yet. And we'll say, yes, we want to be parents, but if you can parent this child, we'd rather you do that.
So even the prospective adoptive parents are on board.
Correct.
Because you've trained them.
Correct. We've provided a lot of education, and I have witnessed it. I have sat in a hospital room with an individual who has just given birth. They are holding their child. My adoptive family will walk into the room and say, are you like, you can parent? You really, like, you can, are you sure you want to do this? We will include you in open adoption if that's what you're looking for. I had a family, they found a match and a placement through somebody else, a lawyer in another state. And they're in the courtroom with birth mom. Birth mom's getting ready to do all the stuff. And my family stood up and said, look, this is a permanent decision. Are you sure you want to place your child with us? If you can parent, we really would love for you to be able to do that. The judge sent us a note or an email and was like, I have never had anybody do that or say that. Like, what? Even the judge was shocked. Yeah. And mom ended up doing a placement and family has a great open adoption with her. They've in great communication, but we always say that PACT is not for everybody. Yeah. But the PACT families that we do have are on board with family preservation first. Yeah. They are on board with not coercing somebody to place their child with strangers. Right. And all the way up to the moment of signing paperwork. Are you sure? Yeah. So
that's amazing. Because boy, you see in the news, even in my adoption parent circles, oh man, these hopeful adoptive parents, they got their claws out. They are like, that is mine. And it's like a death if the birth mom changes her mind. And I'm like, that was not yours, not in any shape or way or form until, And really, the child's never going to be just yours anyway. No. It's not like the birth family gets erased. It takes a lot of openness and kind of maturity and looking beyond yourself in these situations. And a lot of adoptive parents are just so desperate for a child. I think they forget all that. I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'd say we feel really solid about our families because the orientation I lead, and anybody listening to this can go onto YouTube and find my orientation video. Wow. And I say specifically, just because you cannot have a child by birth does not mean you're entitled to somebody else's. Yeah. I say PACT's focus is family preservation. Our client, our focus is the child and what's in their best interest, right? Our last focus is prospective adoptive parents, right? So we weed out the people that are like, but I just want a baby. Yeah. And then we stick around with the people that are like, yeah, this is a messed up industry. I want to be able to be a parent. And if I can, I'd rather go this route where I know the birth family or first family was fully supported, was given options counseling, received post-placement support. Yeah. That's the biggest thing I've noticed. We're a tiny agency. In 2021, we did 0 placements and we were fine. Okay. Other adoption agencies probably would have had to close their doors because they rely on family separation to keep their doors open.
Yeah, right. Yeah. It's like literally a commodity of like supply and demand situation.
Correct.
So you must have funding from other sources or grants or something.
Yeah, we're an adoption. I say we're an adoption organization and the agency is 25% of what we do. Okay. We have our family camps, education, support, fundraising, stuff like that.
And you provide quite a bit more post-placement support than most. I've heard adoptive parents say as soon as that check cleared, the social worker wouldn't answer their calls anymore.
Yes.
So again, that supply and demand situation. But you guys continue to supply resources and training? And what do you give people?
Everything. The blessing of the pandemic was this shift to virtual things. Yeah. So now we have virtual support calls every single month that serve adoptees of color, adoptive parents of color, birth and first family members. white adoptive parents to kids of color, adoptive parents to young adult transition age youth.
Okay. Like my kid.
Yeah, like 18 to 25-year-olds.
Yeah.
Beth kind of started a group around that. So we have like 5 support calls every single month that run every single month. They're never empty.
Wow.
My support call is easily 20 to 35 adoptees every single month. I get new adoptees every single month. We have webinars every month. We have our annual family camp that runs over the summer. We run a teen and tween club for 10 to 18-year-olds that runs here in the Bay Area. That is starting in October. Okay. And then another example in terms of placement and post-placement support. Some PACT families come to PACT, but then they desperately want to be parents. So they work with other agencies and sometimes they find a placement through somebody else.
Okay.
And of all my families that did that, every single one has called me at around 2 months, 3 months of the baby being with them to say, our kid's birth parent is really struggling. They need financial help. They need this, they need this, they need this. And then I have to say, you have to call your agency. Yeah. We didn't do your placement. You can send them to us for support group. But I was like, I don't have any connect to them. You have to call your agency. And then they've all gotten back to me to say, oh, our agency says there's nothing else they can do because the adoption's finalized or the adoption's right. They've signed paperwork.
Well done.
Whereas we have birth parents that are a year to 9 years post-placement. They can call us whenever they need to. We have a birth parent fund. Oh, wow. So if they do call us when their kid is 6 and they're like, I really just need help with rent. Okay. We can tap into our birth parent fund and help them with rent. Wow. My coworker, Susan, still has a monthly check-in. It's not needed all the time, but she has a monthly check-in held with one of our families, their kid's birth mother, because mom did the placement, but it was challenging for her. Okay. So she speaks with my coworker on a monthly basis. Oh. And my other families that work with other agencies, their kid's birth family does not get that support.
Nada. Yeah. Wow. That sounds amazing. And tell us a little bit more about the camp, PACT camp.
Ooh, PACT camp. Okay. It's called PACT camp, but I'll break it down. It is a conference for adults and a camp for kids.
Oh, okay. The kids get to camp.
Yeah. The kids get camp.
Adults have to go learn stuff.
Correct. Right. And adults are learning stuff. While it is predominantly kids of color at the camp, but we did a push to bring in adoptive families of color. And then, so we have 25% of our slots are held for adoptive families of color, and they fill up pretty quickly. And they also get their own breakout sessions to sit as adoptive parents of color with no white parents in there, safe affinity space, that sort of thing. Keynote speakers talking about race, talking about adoption, talking about family, talking about reproductive justice, talking about open adoption, small breakout sessions, mindfulness, parenting, right? Like how can you calm yourself down to then attune to your child who's having an uproar or is maybe really quiet and isolating. So parents are in like a conference and are getting really intense education, training, and support.
Nice.
And then the kids are with mentors, all who are individuals of color, and about 85% of them are adoptees themselves or former foster youth. Okay. Either adopted by white parents or within same race placements. And the kids do lanyards and art activities and dance class, and they go swimming and they do PACT Olympics, like field day, with each other. And then I come in and it's adoption talk with Miss Katie. Okay. So I sit with kids ages 5 to 17. It's age appropriate, right? So like the 5 and 6 year olds, I'm like, who's adopted? And they're like, yay. And we're, jumping around and talking about why adoption can feel special, but also they know. And they're like, adoption's also really hard, Miss Katie, right? Like I'm the only Black kid at my school, Miss Katie. Everybody points at my family, Miss Katie, right? So they're 5 and 6, but they know, and they've already been called names. They've already had people look at them funny. Those are my 5 to 9 year olds. And then my 10 to 13, they're starting to ask more questions of like, well, why does adoption happen? They're getting a little more education and awareness. And then my teenagers, our conversations are definitely more like in the looking at the system of adoption and talking about what goes into it, what their parents had to do to adopt. We talk about home study process. So I feel like I get to give them what I didn't get when I was growing up. Yeah. And I see them 3 out of the 5 days that they're in camp programming, they know that I'm coming in to talk about adoption. Some of them love it. Some of them hate it. But my favorite thing is post camp, when parents will send us emails or a Slack message and say, oof, my kid had a really tough day, but they remembered what was talked about at camp and they knew how to respond. I also work with the younger kids on how do you respond when somebody makes fun of your family or teases you or pokes at you about your adoption. So they're like, oh, my kid knew that they could say this, or they knew that they could walk away, or they knew that they didn't have to answer these intrusive questions.
That's
and
brilliant.
Thank you so much.
Nice.
And my favorite story from this year, it was a camper who didn't want to be in the circle, but the mentors did a great job of keeping that camper in the room, just doing some art activities. So they were listening. Yeah. And we got an email from their parents and they said, we just had the most amazing conversation with our kid. This kid was about 13 on the system of adoption and why they were placed and how that's unfair. Yeah. And they said to us, I love you guys. And it's also unfair that this was why I was placed. Wow. And they were like, they have never said this. They have never. And I just said, oh my goodness. They just sat and listened and then were able to talk to their parents in a way that their family had never done before. Right.
And because their parents had just been into this conference, they didn't flip out when their kids said, correct, but I love you, but this is really painful. They didn't say, you should be grateful.
Correct. And that is a lot of what we get from parents. They'll send us a quick note of, oh my gosh, my kid had you're not my real mom, or I wish I wasn't adopted, and they said, because of what I learned at PACT camp, I did not start crying. Yeah. I did not turn it to be about me. Yep. I just held my kid in the pain and said, I know you've had a lot of loss and I want to help you hold you through this. Do you want to sing the PACT camp song? Do you want to talk, right? For the younger kids, they like to sing our PACT camp song. Do you want me to reach out to your mentor to just like check it? So these kids, they come from all over the country, but they know that PACT is their touch point. And that they know that there are other kids around the country. There are other adults around the country. There are other families around the country that look like them, share the same thing. And they're not alone. Yeah. Yeah. They know they're not alone.
It's so important. And I love how you guys don't just take the kids, you take the kids and the parents. So everybody's learning together, but on their own separate track. I think that's brilliant. I wish I would have gone to there.
For people listening that are like, oh my gosh, I want to go. It's incredibly intense. There will be tears. There will be fights. There will be like, if you think it's a reality show, if you think about it, we are putting 300 to 400 individuals in a contained space.
Oh, that many. Wow.
Yeah. We have 130 families. Ooh. Or anywhere from 115 to 130 families. A family could be one parent with 3 kids, 2 parents with 5. We have 7 youth groups that are run by mentors, and each group has anywhere from 3 to 5 mentors. Some of them have 6. Wow. Then we have specialists. We have a hair clinic to do haircuts and braiding for the kids. We have a dance instructor. We have a photographer. We have developmental specialists that float around. We have our PAC staff, and then we have all the speakers that come in. Wow. So if we counted every number, there's maybe one day where all 400 of us are like on site together, stirring the pot. That's what we say on day 1. We are getting ready to stir the pot. Yeah. The kids are going to react because nobody has talked about adoption with them before. Some of these kids have never seen this many Black people before, this many Latinx, this many Asian. Some of these kids have never seen other families that look like them. My mentors, it's our lived experience. So I will be completely candid. We are constantly triggered by seeing white parents with kids of color. Oh, yeah.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah. And the Black adoptive parents, Latinx adoptive parents, and Asian adoptive parents, basically the parents of color, are triggered by seeing white parents with kids that look like them. So it's stir the pot, all these emotions, tears, anger, everything. And then at the end of the day, on our last day, it's also like kids will bawl their eyes out and say, I just want to live at PAC camp forever. Yeah. Because for once, they're not othered. Yeah. And for once, they're comfortable. So yeah.
Oh, that sounds really, really special. On a scale of 1 to 10, how much roughing it is required? Cabins?
Absolutely not.
Oh,
absolutely none. It's called camp, but it's at a resort. We were at the Hyatt in Monterey and the Hyatt in Cambridge. Yeah. Turn down service, fully catered food.
Oh, no kidding. Okay. I was picturing like slop on your little
sloppy joes. And sleeping bags. Yeah. No, like the very first PAC camp. And what I do want to add, PACT camp has been around long enough that maybe like a dozen of our mentors, so the counselors, are kids that grew up at Pat
Went
Camp.
through it. Nice.
And have now come back to be mentors.
Wow, that's beautiful.
So they'll get up and they'll introduce themselves. They're like, hey, I'm John. I've been at Pat Camp for 20 years because they grew up and now they're a mentor.
Nice.
Yeah, the first couple were cabins
Okay.
and a couple families like, hey, we'll pitch a tent. And the first were like 40 or 50 families. Since we are now 115 to 130, no, we're at full hotels or resorts with conference centers.
Oh, that's my kind of camping.
Yeah.
There we go. Very good. That's great. Now, you were talking about you and other people getting triggered with these white parents, with the people of color kids. Is there any way for us to do that right? Is that possible?
Ooh, that's man. Okay, I'll answer from my adoptee self and then my social worker self. The adoptee self, this is when people either like me or hate me. As an adoptee, I 100% want to abolish transracial adoption, specifically white parents adopting kids of color. The reason for this, besides my 41 years of personal experience and 17 of professional, is within my adoptee support group that has been running for almost 10 years. 90% of us were raised by white parents. I've sat with probably over 200 transracial or interracial adoptees. I hear the struggle. I've seen the struggle. I still see it. I know what they have to face. Some have been deported back to their countries. Some have committed suicide. Some are in rehab. Some are right. And I'm just like, I can't. I love my parents, but I personally, as an adoptee, I do not think white parents should adopt kids of color. My social worker hat, if I had a magic wand, it would be that every white prospective adoptive parent does a year or more of anti-bias, anti-racist training.
Wow.
Does not live in middle of nowhere in Minnesota.
Yeah.
Has already deep connections to communities of color or is actively involved in one. It's still not going to be enough. Yeah. But it's going to be a lot better than what I had and what generations have had. And kids right now. So kids at Pat Camp that I sat with 3 or 4 weeks ago who are 35 years younger than me are still experiencing what I experienced 30 years ago, are still experiencing what the J. Ron Kims and the Susan Bronco experienced 40 or 50 years ago. Right. So there have been some changes and there still are not enough.
Not enough. Yeah. Well, I agree with you. And I am a transracial parent, although my son did have a Japanese dad, adoptive dad, but he identified as white. So I don't know what you call that. Like he didn't even see himself as Asian. So he was not a very good role model. You know, he has so sublimated himself. Anyway, so I agree that it is a way bigger deal than I thought it was. My kid got teased relentlessly and bullied and microaggression against, and he couldn't tell me. Or maybe he tried to tell me and I'd be like, oh no, honey, it's fine. They're not doing that to you. And I meant well. I was trying, but I just didn't know. How am I supposed to know? I don't get teased for my race. So I agree with you that it is just fraught. It's just fraught. And if white parents have adopted already, or if they're thinking about it, well, you just got to dig in and learn whatever you can, because we don't want you to give it the children back. You know, if we're already doing it, let's figure out how to do the best we can. Right? That's all we can do. Right.
Yeah. And I have tons of white families that come to camp and they're like, oh my gosh, we live in the middle of nowhere, Minnesota. Well, what can we do? And I'm like, you can still do things. We had a family years ago that came to camp. Their daughter grew up at camp and is now a mentor for us, that lived in somewhere Maine.
Okay. Maine.
And they were like, oh, we are too white. This is too white. Our daughter's Black. They moved to Oakland, California. Yeah. And raised their kids in Oakland. Right. Yeah. That alone, to me, I was like, that's incredible. Yeah. Right. So the white parents that are willing to be uncomfortable, do the work.
That are willing to move. Because I got my kid from Japan. We're asking our kids to move oftentimes across the world or across town or whatever. So maybe we need to move sometime to make it not so hard for our kids. And if parents aren't willing to do that, that is sort of indicative of they don't think it's that important, right?
Correct. Yeah.
I mean, is it like that? I don't know. I guess so.
And parents that come to PAC camp or come to PACT and just they're like, oh, you talk about race too much. This is so uncomfortable. I often say, because a fellow adoptee of mine said on a panel once, if you as the white adoptive parent are comfortable, you're not doing it right. Yeah. Because your kid is uncomfortable. Adoptees of color with a white parent or white parents, we are uncomfortable. 95% of the time we are with our family.
Yeah.
I'm only probably comfortable when I'm in private with my family. So people aren't looking at me, asking questions, getting those stares. So when families come to PAC camp and the parents are like, this is so hard. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. You have to be uncomfortable for 5 days while your kid gets to thrive.
Yeah.
Too bad, right?
Yeah,
Like the next 360 days, they're uncomfortable and you're thriving.
Yeah.
Well,
and the adoptive parents are the ones that are choosing this. You know, the adoptee's not saying, well, maybe if they're older, but most adoptees aren't saying, oh, please put me in this situation. So adoptive parents are the ones starting this ball rolling. And so I think we definitely have the obligation to do the very best we can for our kids. How are your parents now? You're doing this work and you're very outspoken about it. And are they on board with you or?
Yes and no. I'd say my parents and I are close enough. I'm not fully estranged from them, which a significant amount of adoptees of color is fully estranged from their white families. I am not. I'm also not the adoptee that talks to their adoptive parents every day or sees them every month type of thing. We're close enough. Okay. They're interesting. My dad sends me every adoption article he finds through the New York Times. He'll bring it up. Okay. My mom has gotten better. She definitely early on broke into the tears. We messed up. This was our fault sort of thing. And then I have spoken up more and shared my experience, and she's listened more and understands more. And she understands not to bring it up around me sometimes. Because the other thing is, this is my life and my profession. So when I go to my parents, I just want to be Katie and like, but then they want to know how I'm doing and how work is. Yeah.
And then you bring up adoption again. Oh,
and I have to bring it up again. Yeah. So there are those pieces. Yeah. What I realized with my parents and what I now tell parents now, especially those that are considering adoption. Yes, you want a kid. Yes, you want to be a parent. But if you're forming your family through adoption and you're white, number one, you have to be a parent, right? My parents, excellent parents, A+. I'm a good human. They taught me well. They raised me. I was safe. As adoptive parents, they get like a C+. They talked about adoption, but then made comments of like other stuff, not super open, but they didn't hide it. Okay. And then the third tier is they are white parents to a kid of color where they get a solid F. And I recognize the time they were not supported. I also recognize for people that might still be freaking out because of what I said earlier, it's also a deeper systemic thing. We are all deeply drenched in white supremacy. And white is right. And that's what you're supposed to do. So my parents didn't have the support, didn't have the A, B, and C. That's where I've seen the shift, right? So adoptees from my generation, adoptees now, when I ask them that question, like, hey, can you grade your parents? There are some that are like, oh, as an adoptive parent, they get a B because I have an open adoption. We talk about it. I have like there's things that their family does. And then there are some kids of color with white parents. And they're like, my parents get like a C or a B around being white parents to a kid of color because they've actually done the work. So I can say I've seen a shift with some kids of this generation.
So it's possible to do it better, better or worse, I guess. Now, you mentioned when your mom kind of, sometimes we call it coming out of the fog for adoptees and adoptive parents. I definitely think we have to come out of the fog too. And there's a lot of tears and a lot of guilt and shame. And I just wonder from an adoptee perspective, can you tell us how that feels from your end and what we can do to mitigate any bad things coming your direction when we are coming out of the fog and realizing, oh, crap. What do we do?
Find your own supports. Find your own therapy. Find other white adoptive parents. It should not be put on the kid. I mean, I'm 40, but I'm forever my mom's baby. I'm her kid, right? I had to deal with her tears and her stuff when she suddenly had this away. And I'm like, I had no choice in this. I didn't want to be removed from the only language, culture, scent, smell, and rhythm I ever knew and have my body jarred for the rest of my life. Because adoption is a lifelong journey that I'm still navigating today. You need to find your own supports, your own therapy. A lot of what I do with prospective adoptive parents is also, what have you done around your own fertility or infertility, if that's why you're coming to adoption? We've had some people that are starting to come to adoption due to climate change and they don't want to overpopulate the world.
Oh, like ZPG kind of stuff. Zero population growth.
So they're like, well, we could get pregnant, but we don't want to add, so we'll help where it's needed. Well, also when people tell me we want to help, I try to send them to the foster care system because that's where the real need is.
Yeah.
But yeah, not putting it back on your kid, no matter their age.
Yeah.
Obviously a young 18 or under, but even 25, 35, 45, 55, we already had to navigate it as kids. Probably never told you about it.
Yeah.
Because one of our biggest fears is you're going to send me back.
Getting rejected. Yeah.
You're going to not want me. Yeah. If I even question you or push back on this.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Finding this, and PACT has supports.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I have tons of, resources for adoptive parents. So if anyone needs more, go to PACT for sure. But I've got tons and tons and tons of ways to help send you to places and things. And okay. So I wonder, do you guys want one big, I'm sorry, and then that's it? I'm sorry. Does that get to you?
Yeah. I feel like sometimes the sorry can get to me. And I think it does get to a lot of kids and adults. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think back on my group because I have the privilege of sitting with fellow adult adoptees of color every month and mm-hmm. hearing their experience and sharing space with them. And I would say what a lot of us really want is specifically our white parents to acknowledge their involvement in the adoption industry.
Okay.
Their lack of knowledge, which I know is not totally in their control, but even saying, mm-hmm. and we did not push back on it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
We did not question.
Yeah.
Acknowledging the role you played, the privilege you hold, the power you hold, mm-hmm. acknowledging that the system is not fair, mm-hmm. acknowledging that your kid is a kid of color. mm-hmm. After the murder of George Floyd in 2020, we were already within the midst of COVID. So my support group had already gone virtual. Mm-hmm. And then literally the next group after his murder and everything broke and the protests started, my numbers quadrupled. Oof. Of adoptees of color, specifically a lot of them Black, wow. and a lot of Latinx wow. coming in and saying, my white parents do not see me as a person of color. They want to know why I'm out there protesting. Oh. They're asking me if there's a race war, which side will I choose? Yeah. They're asking why I don't want to go visit family in Tennessee who still fly Confederate flags. Oof. The stuff I heard. And then my support groups, we used to meet once a month. We started meeting twice a month for a couple months because we were all locked down at home. Yeah. My younger adoptees, so 20 to 28 were living at home with their white parent. Ooh. So they're in a closet, headphones on, my God. Saying, I'm just going to listen because I can't speak because, wow. But they needed the community. They needed the space. Yeah. They needed to know they weren't alone. Wow. They needed to know that it's okay for them to stop contact with their family if they need to for their own safety and mental health. Yeah. So what we really want is we want our parents or our caregivers, whoever, to acknowledge, I played a role in this. It's really messed up. I'm sorry I can't do anything about it right now. Mm-hmm. But moving forward, this is where I'm going to be different. Mm-hmm. Right? Okay. When somebody asks me, oh, you're so lucky you adopted, da-da-da, I will educate them on, actually, it's a significant loss and a trauma. And, or I'll just ignore them and not give them my time and energy to explain your story. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, that's very, very good advice. And I know this whole conversation is probably going to be difficult for a lot of adoptive parents or community members to hear, but it's so critical. And we have to listen to people like you that have the lived experience of being a person of color in a white family. I mean, mm-hmm. I talk to people all the time that have kids that are 6, 8, 14, 30, I don't know, and they're fine. Yeah. Nothing is wrong. They're mm-hmm. just fine. mm-hmm. I'm like, okay, well, call me.
Right. I know.
Call me in a couple of years. But are they really fine? I don't think so. I don't think they're fine. And I think they're not able to tell us mm-hmm. that they're not fine.
Yeah.
Is that what?
Yes.
Am I on the right track with that?
Yes, absolutely. And there will be, right? They're adoptees. We are not a monolith.
Sure.
They are not all going to say the same thing I'm saying. There are adoptees that have come to my group that have said, I would be dead in the streets if I had not been adopted.
Okay, sure.
Right. And they're like, and I still had a trauma. I lost my first family.
Yeah.
I come home to people who don't look like me, even though they love me. They're my best friend. Mm-hmm. I had one of my young mentors, 20 years old, attended PAC camp for a few years, spoke on a panel with me this summer to the teenagers. Mm-hmm. This individual was adopted by a single white mother. Their mom is great. Mm-hmm. Open adoption. They go back to their country. They're from a Central American country. Mm-hmm. Super involved. Their mom talks about whiteness, talks about da-da-da. Mm-hmm. And this adoptee is like, love my mom. She's great. And I still have a trauma and a loss.
Yeah.
So she's fine in quotes.
Yeah.
But she also, your body keeps the score.
Yeah.
Our bodies remember when we were separated from our mother, father, or whoever else was caring for us in that moment.
Yeah.
She's 20. Is she still going to say that when she's 28 and 32? I don't know. We also grow up. So your 6-year-old who thinks adoption is the most awesome thing in the world, call me and Beth in 36 years and let us know what they're saying.
Exactly.
And my last piece on that is I have a couple friends who are adopted. It's not their life. They don't ever talk about it. But as soon as they're with me, somehow it comes in the conversation.
You're their safe person they can talk to about.
And I'm like, because you really do want to talk about this, but you don't have anybody else to, and you're presenting as okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I had my adoption therapist when I came out of the fog. I was like, is this the whole thing? Is this everything? And she goes, no, it's not the whole thing, but it is a thing. It's always a thing, but not always the thing. Is that, do you agree with that?
Yeah.
It's always a thing. It's always one of the things, the adoption trauma, the relinquishment trauma, at least, and whatever else we also did to the kids after we adopted them. Oh gosh. Yeah. It's hard.
It's hard. And I feel like parents are like, is this their adoption, or is this the bad grade they got? Or is it right? Like when a kid has big feelings, and it's always going to be an underlying thing, especially when we don't look like our parents.
Yeah.
Right.
It just adds a huge layer.
Mm-hmm.
It adds a huge layer to it for sure. Well, I really appreciate you, all the work you're doing at PACT. I think it's so necessary. I'm glad there's one adoption placement service and adoption post-placement service that is out there helping people of color and helping to do it the best that we can, right?
Yeah.
In an ideal world, all the birth parents would be able to just keep their kids and
correct,
or find family members or whatever, temporary something. But when adoption is absolutely necessary, it seems like you guys are doing it right. So thank you for all that.
That's what we're trying.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying. And if there are adoptees listening to this, because I know there are adoptees out there that are like, you can never do it ethical and there should not be adoption placements and and I hear you. But when you are sitting across from somebody who just gave birth and knows they don't want to be a parent or can't be a parent, I don't want that kid to go to the foster care system and get lost. I don't want that kid to go to a white family and not see themselves reflected.
Yeah. I
want that kid to go to one of my Black, Latinx, Asian, Indigenous families that will hold the loss and the trauma and take away that layer of, we don't look like, and I know they're not going to match, but a Black kid will be in a Black home who knows what it means to be Black.
Yeah. Yeah. My son recently just told me, Mom, when I look in the mirror, I see a white person and he's Japanese. That's a problem. That's a very big problem.
And that's not just, and that's back to like, it's not all adoption. It definitely is, but that's just the white supremacy that seeps into everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just the white supremacy, the media, the messaging, Yeah.
It's really, really tough. So, oh gosh. Well, everybody take a deep breath, and we're just trying to do this the best that we can. And maybe someday you'll be worked out of a job.
Right.
I guess we can hope that you get worked out of this job. But until then, I'm glad there's people like you that are adopted yourself and that are willing to walk that very thin line of ethical adoption. So really, really grateful for you. And I said the grateful word.
It's okay.
I know adoptees hate that grateful word. But let's see, how about I really respect all the work you're doing. Is that better?
Yes, that's great. Thank you. And I too, thank you for having this and letting our voices be heard and letting people that don't want to read or watch and just like to learn through audio. Yeah. If you're listening to this, I hope something is sinking in and sticking with you.
Yeah, I do too. Oh man, I listen to podcasts all day long.
Same.
In the car. So thank you everyone for listening through this kind of difficult conversation. I know it's not super fluffy to talk about race and transracial adoption. So thank you for sticking with us. Katie, if people want to get a hold of you and or PACT, how would they do that?
Our website, pactadopt, all one word, .org. We are super up to date on our website. We update all of our events. That's where you can find all of our support calls. We also have a Center for Race and Adoption Focused Therapy that currently is only applicable to California families.
Okay.
Definitely Bay Area. I think we can do some virtual, but check out the website. It also has all of our camp information, webinars, support groups, teen and tween club. Everything about PACT is on our website, and we keep it super up to date. My email, and I welcome emails, just my first name, Katie, at pactadopt.org. If you're somebody that wants to come after me for what I said or whatever, I'm likely going to ignore you. But if you're somebody that wants more resources, an adoptee that wants to come into my group or wants additional group and therapy support resources, I also have that.
Well, it's clear that you've thought this through a bit.
Yeah.
It's not just a spur of the moment decision you've made to have this stance you have about transracial adoption. So I hope people can understand that.
Yeah. If we had a magic rewind me back to 5 years, what I said 5 years ago is vastly different.
Okay.
But a result of the pandemic and the racial awareness reckoning uprising and sitting with adoptees and doing more placements as an agency has just shifted my thought process.
And it will probably continue to shift as things progress and the world changes. We do feel like we're in this big flux right now in general, I think. So hopefully for the better. Well, thank you again. And everybody go look up PACT. While you're on the internet, go look up Unraveling Adoption. It's unravelingadoption.com. If you're an adoptive or foster parent and are looking for extra help, I have a free support group and I have tons of resources. And I also do parent coaching. So if you're looking for that, I have individual and group coaching. And if you want to support Unraveling Adoption to keep our podcast commercial free, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/unravelingadoption. I think that's all the announcements. Well, thanks again, Katie. This has been great talking to you. I'm glad to know you, and hopefully we can collaborate somehow in the future.
Yeah, totally. Thank you, Beth.
Thank you. And Katie and I want you all to stay safe.